The desert had its own kind of silence, not empty, but alive. Wind hummed low between the red cliffs, brushing through sagebrush and whispering secrets across the sand. The air was dry, golden, and endless, except for one small hollow hidden beneath the rocks, a place where the earth breathed warm mist into the dawn. The Apache called it the Spirit Spring, a sacred refuge said to cleanse the wounds of body and soul. It was into this secret place that Tia stumbled barefoot, bruised and half-starved. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, her lips cracked from thirst. The world she had known, the trading camp, the cruel men, the promises that turned to traps had burned away behind her. For 2 days, she had run from the men who swore to bring her back. She didn't care where she ended up, only that it was far from the voices that had laughed when she begged to be free. When she first saw the steam rising from behind the rocks, she thought it was smoke and another fire, another danger. But as she crept closer, she heard only the sound of bubbling water and birds greeting the morning. The spring glimmered in the early light, smooth as glass, ringed with moss and wild flowers that defied the desert's cruelty. Tia fell to her knees and dipped her hands into the warmth. It was the first gentle thing she'd felt in weeks. She looked around. No one, no horses, no tracks, just the steady pulse of water from the earth. She unlaced her boots, let them fall, and waded in. The warmth climbed up her calves, then her knees, then her trembling body as she sank deeper, sighing through cracked lips. The pain of the desert faded. The bruises on her arms softened under the water's touch. For a moment, she felt clean again, as though the land itself had forgiven her for running. She didn't know that only a few paces away, another soul moved through the shadows. Chayton, the Apache warrior, was returning from a hunt. His bow hung across his shoulder, his hair bound with rawhide, his body weary from travel. He had come to the spring as he always did after battle, to wash off the blood, to let the spirits take what sorrow they would. But that morning, as he parted the pine branches, he saw something no spirit had ever shown him before. A woman, pale, skinned, trembling, standing in his sacred water. For a heartbeat, he thought she was a vision. The mist curled around her like smoke, her hair plastered to her neck, her eyes wide as she turned toward the sound of his footsteps. When she saw him, she froze, a wild creature cornered. He stepped forward, silent, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "You are not of this land," he said, his voice low, the Apache words rolling like gravel. "I didn't know anyone was here," she stammered, clutching her arms. "This spring is sacred." His gaze swept over her, not in desire, but disbelief. How had she come here? Through miles of unforgiving land and danger, her feet were bleeding. Her dress was torn. She looked like a spirit half-formed, caught between worlds. Before he could speak again, her foot slipped on a slick stone. With a gasp, she fell forward straight into the water. Instinct overruled thought. He reached out and caught her. His hand met hers underwater, a warm, small trembling. Their eyes locked and the world seemed to stop breathing. The desert wind faded. The birds went silent. And all that remained was the sound of water and the thudding of two hearts that didn't yet know what they had begun. She gasped softly. "Let go," she whispered, though her voice didn't carry conviction. Chayton's jaw tightened. "If I let go," he said, "you'll drown." And in that single moment, the steam curling between them, the sacred spring glowing around their joined hands, something ancient and unseen shifted in the air. The warrior who came to cleanse his soul had found something unexpected. The runaway who sought escape had stumbled into destiny. Neither of them knew it yet, but from that instant on, their paths were bound by water, by chance, and by the quiet force that lives between fear and belonging. For a moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the ripple of water between their bodies and the low hum of the wind brushing through the canyon. Chayton's hand still gripped Tia's wrist, firm, but not cruel, holding her steady against the pull of the spring's current. She stared up at him at the hard lines of his face, the wet strands of black hair clinging to his shoulders, the scar that cut across his cheek like a story carved by time. "Please," she whispered, voice trembling. "I didn't mean to intrude." His eyes narrowed. They were dark, but not empty, filled with questions he didn't yet want to ask. "No one finds this spring by accident," he said in a low voice, his accent rough, but steady. "How did you come here?" Tia swallowed hard. Her throat ached from thirst and fear. "I was running. Men were chasing me. I only wanted water." The word men made his expression change. A flash of something darker behind his gaze. Slowly, he released her wrist, though he stayed close enough to catch her again if she fell. She stumbled back a few steps, wrapping her arms around herself. The wet fabric of her dress clung to her like second skin, and she realized too late how exposed she was. Her face flushed deep red. Turning her back to him, she tried to cover herself, but the sound of his low, calm voice stopped her. "You are safe," Chayton said quietly. "If I wanted you gone, you would already be gone." His words were not a threat, and they were truth. Somehow that truth steadied her. She turned back around and met his eyes fully for the first time. He stood half in the water, his broad chest gleaming in the soft light, a bow and quiver slung nearby on a rock. There was power in him, not just strength, but control. A man who belonged to the wild, who knew its rules and spoke its silent language. "What tribe are you from?" she asked softly. Not sure why she dared to speak again. "Apache," he replied. "This land is ours. This water sacred. You should not be here." Her heart sank. "Then will you take me to your people? I can pay." He cut her off with a sharp look. "No, my people do not take payment from those who break their laws." Ta's voice cracked. "I didn't know. I swear it. I was just trying to live." Chayton's gaze softened. He could see the truth written in the dirt on her face, the bruises on her arms, the shaking in her breath. She was no trespasser with intent, just a soul the desert had nearly devoured. "You are not the first runaway I have found," he said at last. "The world beyond these cliffs is cruel. But here," he looked toward the rising steam, the sacred pool that shimmered like living glass. "Here, no one hunts." Her eyes filled with tears she had held back too long. "Then let me stay just for a little while until they stopped looking." He turned away, scooping a handful of water to wash the dirt from his arms. For a while, neither spoke. The silence wasn't hostile anymore. It was heavy with unspoken things. Finally, he said, "If you stay, you obey my words. You go where I tell you. The spirits of this place are not kind to strangers." She nodded quickly. "I'll do whatever you say." Chayton looked over his shoulder at her, and for the first time, there was the faintest trace of a smile. Not warmth, but curiosity. "You speak like a child, but your eyes, they've seen more than most warriors." Ta didn't know what to say. The compliment, if it was one, struck something deep inside her. He motioned to a blanket draped over a nearby rock and handed it to her. "Cover yourself. The wind will turn cold soon." As she wrapped the rough wool around her shoulders, she caught him watching her reflection in the water. Not with desire, but with a strange, unreadable calm, when she finally asked, "What will you do with me?" His answer came low and certain. "Nothing," he said. "For now you will rest. Tomorrow I decide whether to let you go or keep you hidden." And as the steam curled between them once more, Tia couldn't tell whether she'd escaped danger or stepped right into the heart of it. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the canyon, brushing against the mist that rose from the spring like ghostly ribbons. Tia awoke to the smell of smoke and the sound of crackling fire. For a moment, she didn't know where she was, only that she was warm, wrapped in a thick blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. Then memory rushed back like a wave. The spring, the warrior, his steady eyes in the steam. She sat up quickly, scanning the clearing. Across from her, Chayton crouched near the fire, roasting meat on a sharpened stick. His movements were quiet, efficient, and calm like the land itself. "You slept," he said without looking at her. "Good, you needed it," Tia rubbed her eyes. "How long was I out?" "Since last night," he replied. "You fainted after you left the water. Too weak to fight. I almost thought the spirits would take you before dawn." She looked down, embarrassed. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." He glanced at her, eyes sharp beneath his dark lashes. "You already have," Ta swallowed hard. The tone wasn't cruel, just truth. He turned back to the fire and tore a piece of meat, offering it to her on the end of the stick. She hesitated, then reached for it. "Eat," he ordered quietly. "You'll need strength if you plan to keep running." Her fingers brushed his when she took the food. His hand was warm, calloused, but not rough. The hand of someone who'd worked the land and fought to protect it. She chewed slowly, realizing how long it had been since she'd eaten anything more than roots and rainwater. Between bites, her voice came out small. "You said you'd decide today whether to let me go." "I did," he said. "And I've decided." Her breath caught, and he stood straightening to his full height, tall, broad, his shadow stretching across her like a shield and a threat at once. "You cannot go." "Not yet." Her eyes widened. "Why not?" He looked toward the canyon walls. "The men who chased you, they're still near. I saw their tracks at sunrise. 3 horses, 2 rifles." Tia's stomach turned cold. "They'll kill me if they find me." He nodded. "Yes, which is why you stay here." Her relief was quickly followed by suspicion. "Stay here with you?" Chayton crossed his arms unreadable. "You trespassed on sacred ground. I can't release you until I speak with the elders. Until then, you remain under my watch. So, I'm your prisoner." "If that's how you wish to see it," he said calmly. "Better a prisoner than a corpse." She wanted to protest, to scream that she wasn't some threat, just a lost woman. But there was something about his tone that silenced her. He wasn't gloating. He was protecting. Whether out of duty or something else, she couldn't tell. After a long pause, she asked quietly, "What will you do when you take me to your people?" He didn't answer right away. He looked out at the horizon, the vast blazing desert that stretched beyond the cliffs. "They will decide what is right, but I will speak for you." That last sentence struck her like a spark. "You'd speak for me even though I broke your law." Chayton turned toward her then, and for the first time there was something human, something almost gentle in his eyes. "You are not the first outsider to lose their way," he said. "But most don't live to tell it. The desert wanted you dead. I will not give you back to it." Ta's throat tightened. "Why?" she whispered. "You don't even know me." He looked down at her. The ragged dress, the bruises, the fear hidden beneath stubbornness, and said quietly, "Because once I knew someone who ran, too, and no one caught her before the desert did." The words hung in the air like a wound reopened. Tia lowered her gaze, unsure what to say. For the first time since her escape, she felt something other than fear. A strange, fragile safety. Not comfort, but the beginning of it. Chayton moved to the mouth of the canyon, scanning the distance. "Rest while you can," he said. "If those men find this place, you'll need to move quickly." She watched him. The way his body tensed at every sound, the way his hand hovered near his knife, though his eyes stayed calm, and in that quiet space between them. Between captor and captive, protector and protected, the spring's mist rose once more, as if the land itself was holding its breath. That night, the desert turned colder than Taya had ever known. The warmth of day bled away into darkness, and the wind came crawling through the canyon, sharp and bitter. Chayton had built a small fire against the rock wall, its glow flickering across his face. The shadows made him look carved from stone, solid, unyielding, ancient. Tia sat close to the flames, wrapped in a thick blanket he had given her. She held her hands over the fire, trying to coax feeling back into her numb fingers. The air smelled of pine smoke and damp earth. Chayton was kneeling a few feet away, cleaning his knife with a strip of leather. Every so often, he glanced toward the canyon's mouth, listening to the wind the way a man listens for footsteps. He had said little since morning, speaking only when necessary. Finally, Tia broke the silence. "You're watching for them, aren't you? The men who were after me?" "Yes." His voice was quiet but firm. "They are still hunting. I can smell their horses on the wind." Tia's stomach tightened. "Will they find us?" "Not if I keep them guessing," he said, sliding the knife into its sheath. "They follow tracks. I made false ones heading north. They'll waste a day chasing ghosts." She studied him through the firelight, his broad shoulders, the scar that cut from his cheekbone to his jaw. He moved like a man used to danger, but there was no panic in him, only certainty. "You've done this before," she murmured. He nodded once. Many times a long pause stretched between them. Then softer, she asked. "You said you lost someone." "A woman who ran," his hand stilled. For a while, he didn't answer. When he finally did, his voice carried a weight that silenced even the wind. "My sister, she was 16. Traders came through our village. Promised her safety, a better life. They took her instead. I found her too late." Tia's throat tightened. She pulled the blanket closer. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "No one should have to live through that." He met her eyes briefly. And in that glance, something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, pain, a kind of understanding that belonged to those who had both lost more than they ever expected to. For the first time, Tia noticed the way his eyes softened when he looked at the fire, how his shoulders carried both strength and sorrow. She realized then that beneath the warrior's hard exterior was a man haunted by memory. After a while, he spoke again. "You remind me of her in some ways, wild, stubborn, always talking when she should be quiet." Tia smiled faintly despite herself. "And you always quiet when you should speak." That earned a small sound from him. Not quite laughter, but close enough that it warmed her more than the fire did. "Sleep," he said at last. "You'll need rest. Tomorrow we move before sunrise." "Where will we go?" "There's a place," he said, looking toward the cliffs. "A hidden valley where the water runs year-round. My people used it long ago. We'll shelter there until I know it's safe." She hesitated. And after that, Chayton's eyes met hers again, steady, unreadable. "After that, you'll decide where your path leads. For now, you walk with me." She nodded slowly, her heartbeat strangely loud in her chest. "Then I'll walk with you." As the fire burned low, she lay on the blanket he'd spread near the wall. The stone was cold beneath her, but the air around her felt different, protected. She could hear him nearby, the quiet rhythm of his breathing, the soft sound of his knife being set aside. Before sleep took her, Tia whispered. "You could have left me, you know. Let the desert finish what it started." His reply came through the dark, low and certain. "The spirits brought you to the spring. I don't question what they send." Her eyes fluttered shut. For the first time in weeks, she slept without fear. And across the dying fire, the Apache warrior sat awake, watching the stars above the canyon rim, wondering why the stranger fate had thrown into his sacred waters now felt like something he had been waiting for all along. The desert dawn crept in soft and slow, painting the canyon in strokes of pale gold. The fire had burned down to embers, and the air carried that strange stillness that comes right before the world wakes. Tia stirred under the blanket, eyes fluttering open. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then she saw him, Chayton, crouched near the stream, bow in hand, his form half lost in mist. He moved like a shadow, quiet and deliberate, each motion filled with purpose. She watched him notch an arrow, draw it back and release. The whisper of the bowring broke the silence. A single sound followed by a dull thud. When he returned, he carried a rabbit in his hand. Its fur still glistening with dew. "You hunt even before the sun," Tia said softly, sitting up and wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. He nodded, expression unreadable. "The land feeds only those who greet it early." She smiled faintly. "Is that an Apache saying?" "No," he said, setting down the rabbit. "It's mine." He began to clean the animal with practiced precision using a small stone blade. Ta watched, both fascinated and uneasy. There was a kind of respect in how he worked. Quick but gentle, never wasting emotion. "Do you ever grow tired of this?" she asked after a while. The silence, the solitude. He glanced up at her, his dark eyes calm. "No, the silence keeps me honest. It reminds me that life doesn't owe us noise." She thought about that, tracing patterns in the sand beside her. "Where I came from, silence meant something was wrong. My father used to say, 'Quiet houses hide loud hearts.'" Chayton's lips twitched, almost a smile. Maybe he was right. When the rabbit was cooked, he shared it with her. The meat was plain but warm, and she ate gratefully. Each bite reminded her how long it had been since she'd last felt full. As they finished eating, Chayton rose and studied the horizon. His body stiffened, his eyes narrowing. "What is it?" she asked. He pointed toward a ridge in the distance. "Tracks 3 horses fresh," her stomach dropped. "The men?" "Yes." His tone was clipped now. "All warmth gone. They're searching wider. We'll need to move." Ta stood quickly, heart hammering. "Where, to?" He slung his bow over his shoulder. "A higher ground to the west. There's a narrow trail through the cliffs. They'll never think to look there." She followed him as he led her through the twisting canyon path. The sun climbed higher, turning the rocks to fire and gold. Sometimes she stumbled on loose stones, but each time she faltered, his hand was there, firm, steady, guiding her forward without a word. At one point she looked up and caught his gaze as he reached down to help her climb. For a breath, the world went still again. His hand engulfed hers strong and warm. The same hand that had caught her in the water days before. "Thank you," she murmured. He gave a curt nod. "You walk better than I expected. Most outsiders fall before they reach this far." "Maybe I've fallen enough for one lifetime," she said, trying to smile. This time he did smile faintly. "But real. Maybe you have." They reached a small ledge overlooking the valley. From up high the land spread out like a painting. Endless ridges, streaks of red sand, and far below the faint dust of hooves moving where the hunters searched. Tia's voice trembled. "They're close." Chayton's jaw tightened. "Closer than I like. Can we hide?" He shook his head. "No. If they find the spring, they'll know we were there. They'll keep following." He paused, then looked at her. "Seriously. If they do, you run west. Don't stop for me. Don't look back." Her breath caught. "I'm not leaving you." "You will if I tell you to," he said firmly. She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. There was something in his eyes that silenced her. A promise fierce and quiet. Below them, a hawk circled once before vanishing into the glare of the sun. The air felt heavy with things unspoken. Danger, fate, the strange bond that was beginning to grow between them. Chayton adjusted the strap of his quiver. "We move again when the light fades," he said. "For now we wait and listen." And as they sat together on the cliff's edge, the desert wind wound around them like an invisible thread, tying 2 lost souls closer than either would yet admit. The sun was sinking behind the red cliffs when the first echo of gunfire shattered the stillness. Tia froze. The sound rolled across the canyon like thunder, echoing off the stone. Birds burst from their nests, scattering into the sky. Chayton had already dropped to one knee, scanning the ridges below them with the sharp focus of a hunter. "They've found the trail," he said quietly, his tone like stone grinding against stone. Her pulse raced. "What do we do?" He reached for his bow and nocked an arrow, eyes never leaving the canyon floor. "We stay above them. They'll move toward the spring. The fools think that's where you'd hide." Another shot cracked through the air. Dust puffed up from the rocks not far from where they crouched. Tia gasped and ducked, pressing her hands over her ears. Chayton turned his head sharply. "Down," he hissed. He pulled her behind a boulder, shielding her with his body. The heat of him, the smell of leather and smoke, the weight of his arm over her. For a fleeting second, she forgot the fear. "Are they close?" she whispered. "Too close," he muttered. "They're circling. Two ahead, one behind." Tia's breath came fast. "They'll kill us." He looked at her then, steady and calm, even with death in the air. "Not if I stop them first." Before she could protest, he moved. Silent as a shadow, he crept toward the edge of the ridge, bowed. Every muscle in his back taut, he loosed the first arrow, and a cry echoed below. One of the men hit, tumbling from his horse. The other two shouted, firing wildly into the cliffs. Stones shattered around them, sending shards flying. Tia crouched low, heart slamming in her chest. Then a sharp cry. Chayton jerked backward, hand clutched to his shoulder. Blood blossomed across his skin like spilled paint. "Chayton," she cried, crawling to him. He grit his teeth, pressing his palm over the wound. "Stay down," he growled, his voice strained, but she ignored him. The men below were reloading, shouting to each other. She could hear their boots crunching on the rocks, getting closer, panic and fury tangled inside her. She grabbed a small stone, her hand trembling. "There's 3 of them," she whispered. "You can't fight them alone." His breathing was shallow now, but his eyes burned with defiance. "I'm not alone," he said. He reached for another arrow, though his injured arm shook. When he tried to pull the string, his strength faltered. The wound bled freely now. Ta made a decision she didn't even understand herself. She grabbed his knife from the ground. "Tell me where," she said. "What?" "Tell me where to strike." He blinked in disbelief, then saw the resolve in her eyes. She was shaking, terrified. But there was something else, too. The same stubborn courage his sister had once carried. Slowly, he pointed toward the narrow trail below. "When they climb the ledge, wait until you see their boots." She nodded. Her hands were slick with sweat. She crouched behind the rocks, holding the knife tight, her breath coming in quick bursts. The first man appeared, a tall figure with a rifle slung over his shoulder. He climbed, grumbling, unaware that death waited just above. When his boot reached the edge, Tia lunged. Her hand struck out, catching him off guard. The knife tore through the air, grazing his arm, but sending him tumbling backward. He shouted, fell, and landed hard against the stones below. The others froze. One raised his gun, but Chayton's arrow found him first. The man dropped. The third turned and ran, disappearing into the brush. Silence fell again. Tia's hands trembled violently as she dropped the knife. I didn't mean to." "You did what you had to," Chayton said hoarsely, leaning against the rock. Blood seeped through his fingers. "You listened." Tears blurred her vision. She tore a strip from her dress and pressed it against his wound. "Don't move. You're losing too much blood." He tried to speak, but winced instead. His strength was fading fast. She looked around desperately. The spring was too far, and she had nothing else to use. Then she remembered the hot spring's warmth, how its water seemed to heal her when she first arrived. A wild idea struck her. "I can help you," she whispered. "But you have to trust me." Chaitan's voice was barely audible. "You don't even know where you're going." "Maybe not," she said fiercely, looping his arm over her shoulder. "But I know where we started." And with the last light of sunset painting the canyon blood red, Taya dragged the wounded Apache warrior toward the spring, back to the water that had bound them from the very beginning. The moon was rising when Tia reached the spring, half carrying, half dragging Chaitan through the narrow canyon. Her arms burned, her knees bled, and her breath came in broken gasp. But she didn't stop. The ground beneath her was slick with sand and blood, and every time she faltered, she heard his soft groan behind her, reminding her that if she failed now, he would die. By the time they reached the water's edge, Chaitan's head hung low, his breathing shallow, his dark hair clung to his forehead, wet with sweat. "Ta," he murmured weakly. "Leave me. Go." She shook her head, her voice trembling but fierce. "You didn't leave me. When I was lost and freezing, you found me. I'm not leaving you now." The steam from the spring rose around them, ghostly under the moonlight. It shimmered against the rock, silver and still. She knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she tried to clean the blood from his shoulder. The arrow had grazed deep, torn muscle, not bone, but the bleeding hadn't stopped. She tore the rest of her sleeve and pressed it against the wound, biting her lip hard to keep her own tears from spilling. "You're not dying tonight," she whispered half to him, half to herself. Chaitan tried to smile, though his face was pale. "You sound like my grandmother," he rasped. "Then listen to me like you'd listen to her." She snapped softly. "Get in the water," he blinked, confused. "The spring?" "Yes," he frowned faintly. "It's for spirits, not men." "Then let the spirits save you," she said, gripping his arm. "You told me once this water was sacred, so trust it now." She helped him slide into the pool, the warm water swirling red around him. Chaitan hissed through his teeth at the pain, but didn't resist. She held him there, her hands steady, even as her heart raced. For a long moment, there was only the sound of water. Slow, steady, alive. Then the bleeding eased. The warmth seemed to breathe through him, softening the rigid lines of his body. His eyes fluttered closed. Tia stayed close, holding his head above the surface. "You're going to be all right," she murmured, though she wasn't sure if he could hear her. "You saved me once. Now it's my turn." She brushed the hair from his face. His skin glowed faintly in the moonlight, strong yet fragile. She could feel the pulse in his neck growing steadier, stronger. When his eyes finally opened again, they were softer, hazier, as if the pain had faded. "You stayed," he said quietly. "Of course I did," he gave a small, tired smile. "You should have run," Taya laughed, breathless. "And missed the chance to tell an Apache warrior what to do." "Not likely." For a moment, the danger, the fear, the blood, money, it all fell away. The night felt still again, almost peaceful. She dipped a cloth into the spring and wiped the dirt from his cheek, her fingers brushing lightly over his jaw. "Why did you come for me that night?" she asked softly. "When you could have left me there." He met her gaze, the fire in his eyes dimmed, but still burning. "Because I saw someone who shouldn't have been alone in a land that eats the weak. Because I couldn't look away." Her throat tightened. "You don't even know who I am." He shook his head faintly. "Maybe not your name, but I know your heart. It fights." The words hit her harder than she expected. She looked down at him, at the man who had risked his life for her twice, whose people would never accept her, and yet whose presence felt like home. When she spoke again, her voice trembled. "Then you'd better heal fast, Chaitan, because I'm not done fighting either." He gave a faint nod, his eyes closing again, exhaustion pulling him under. Ta stayed awake, holding him close as the night deepened around them. The moonlight rippled over the surface of the spring, painting them in silver. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called a lonely, haunting sound that made her shiver. But here in this hidden place, she felt something new, something stronger than fear. As Chaitan's breathing steadied and the bleeding stopped, she whispered, "You caught more than just my hand that night, Chaitan. You caught my soul." Her words hung in the night air, carried away by the wind that sighed softly through the canyon. And for the first time since she'd come to this land, Tia didn't feel like an intruder. She felt like she belonged. When Tia awoke, the canyon was wrapped in golden light. Mist still rose from the spring, curling around the rocks like smoke, and the air smelled of sage and wet earth. For a moment, she forgot the fear of the night before, the gunfire, the blood, the desperate fight to keep Chaitan alive. Then she turned and saw him. Chaitan lay beside the water, his chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. The wound on his shoulder had scabbed over, the angry red fading to brown. His face looked peaceful now, carved by sunlight and shadow. Tia exhaled a shaky breath, a smile tugging at her lips. "You made it," she whispered. She leaned back on her hands, feeling the warmth of the ground beneath her. The birds had returned to the canyon walls, chirping softly, and for the first time in days, there was no sound of pursuit. The hunters were gone or dead. It was just the two of them now. Chaitan stirred, groaning softly as he tried to sit up. Tia rushed to his side, pressing a hand to his chest. "Don't move too fast." He blinked groggily, looking around. "We're still by the spring." "Yes," she said with a grin. "You were bleeding so much, I thought I'd have to drag you all the way to the village. You owe me at least a thank you." He managed a faint laugh that turned into a wheeze. "Then thank you, Tia of the stubborn heart." The way he said her name, soft, slow, like a word meant to stay, made something in her chest tighten. She helped him lean against a rock, offering a bit of jerky she'd kept in her pocket. He took it, his hand brushing hers. The small touch sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the morning sun. They ate in silence for a while, listening to the trickle of water and the call of a hawk overhead. It felt almost ordinary, like they could be anywhere, anyone. But the blood stains on the stones nearby told the truth. They were fugitives. Two people from different worlds tied together by something neither had planned. After a long silence, Chaitan spoke. "They won't stop hunting you," Tia froze. "You think they'll come back?" He nodded slowly. "Men who see a white woman with an Apache warrior, they'll see it as betrayal. To them, I'm not a man. I'm a target." His words hit her like a blade of cold wind. "Then I'll go," she whispered, though her heart twisted even as she said it. "You've done enough. I won't bring more danger to you." But Chaitan's eyes darkened fear and lifted to hers. "You think I'd let you walk into their hands again? You'd never make it past the ridge. Then what do we do?" she asked softly. He looked toward the horizon where the mountains shimmered in the morning haze. "We go north. There's land beyond the river where no one hunts. No one asks questions. My mother's people once lived there. If we make it that far, we can start again." "Start again?" she echoed. He turned back to her, his voice low. "You don't belong to them, and I don't belong to anyone. Maybe that means we belong nowhere. Or maybe it means we make our own place." Ta felt her throat tighten. She wanted to speak. To tell him that she had nothing left in the world except him. But the words tangled on her tongue. Instead, she reached out and touched his wounded shoulder gently. "You'll need a few days before we move," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll gather food, check the trail." He caught her wrist before she could stand. "Ta," she looked down at him. His hand was warm and strong despite the wound, his eyes searching hers. "When you came into my bath," he said quietly, "I thought the spirits were playing tricks and sending me trouble wrapped in pale skin. She blinked, unsure if she should laugh or blush. And now, his lips curved faintly. Now I think maybe they sent me something else. What? She whispered. Someone worth the trouble. Her breath caught, and for a long, fragile moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt alive, like the space before a storm breaks or a confession is made. Then Tia smiled through the tears that had gathered in her eyes. If I'm troubled, Chayton, you have no idea what's coming next. He smiled back, weary but sure. Then I'll keep catching you, even if you keep slipping into my world uninvited. And as the morning sun climbed higher, spilling light over the canyon, Tia realized that no matter where they went next, the world had already changed. Because somewhere between fear and fire, between danger and tenderness, she had found something far more powerful than safety. She had found home. 3 days passed before Chayton was strong enough to travel. His shoulder was still stiff, but the spring had done what medicine could not. It had drawn out the poison, sealed the wound, and left behind a faint scar like a mark from the spirits themselves. Tia packed what little they had. Dried meat, a water skin, and a blanket woven with faded Apache patterns. Chayton's horse, Kiona, had found its way back to them on the second day. Loyal and sure-footed as though she understood her master's pain. When the morning came to leave, Tia stood at the edge of the canyon, gazing toward the north. The sky there was endless, a pale blue that seemed to promise both danger and hope. Are you certain this is the way? She asked quietly. Chayton fastened his bow across his back. It's the only way they won't follow. The soldiers don't cross the White River. Beyond it is land they fear. Mountains and ghost valleys. To them it's cursed. She looked up at him. A hint of a smile on her lips. And to you? He met her gaze. It's home. They began the climb out of the canyon together. The air grew thinner, cooler. Around them, the desert began to change. The dry red stones giving way to pines and scrub. The sharp scent of cedar replacing dust. For hours they rode in silence, save for the creak of saddle leather and the rustle of wind in the trees. Tia's thoughts wandered to the life she'd left behind, to the people who'd sold her, to the man beside her who had turned everything she knew upside down. At one point she spoke softly, almost to herself. Do you ever wish things had been different? Chayton turned his head. Different how? That you'd never found me. That I'd never fallen into your spring. He gave a small humorless laugh. The spirits don't ask what we wish, Ta. They give what we need. And what did you need? She pressed gently. He hesitated, then said. Something to remind me I was still human, that I could still care. Her heart ached at the quiet honesty in his voice. She looked down, her fingers twisting in the reins. You've done more than care. You've saved me. He glanced at her, the corners of his mouth curving faintly. And you've ruined my peace. They both laughed softly, but it was laughter all the same, the kind that broke through the dust and fear like sunlight. By nightfall, they had reached a small ridge overlooking a vast plain. In the distance, mountains rose dark against the horizon, jagged, mysterious, waiting. Chayton dismounted carefully, his injured arm still stiff, and began to gather branches for a fire. Ta helped, kneeling beside him as he struck flint to spark. The flames caught quickly, their glow flickering across his sharp features. For a while, they sat in silence, listening to the wind. Tell me about the land beyond the river, she said softly. Chayton poked the fire with a stick. It's quiet there. The deer still come to drink, and the rivers run clear. My mother used to tell me the stars are brighter there because fewer men have sinned beneath them. Tia smiled faintly. Then maybe that's where we belong. Where no one remembers what we've done. He looked at her through the glow of the flames. You're not the one who needs to be forgiven. Maybe we both do, she whispered. The night deepened. Coyotes called somewhere far off, and the fire crackled low. Chayton shifted closer, spreading the blanket over her shoulders. Their hands brushed, and for a heartbeat, everything else disappeared. The pain, the danger, the miles still ahead. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "We'll cross the river. After that, no one will find us." Tia leaned into him, her head resting lightly against his uninjured shoulder. "Then, tomorrow we start living." He didn't answer, but his arm slipped around her gently, his hand warm against her side. Above them, the stars burned cold and bright, thousands of them, like eyes of the spirits watching silently from the heavens. Ta closed her eyes, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat against her. She knew the journey ahead would be hard, that the world beyond the river was wild and unforgiving. But for the first time since her life had been sold away, she wasn't afraid, because beside her was the man who had once caught her hand in the water and never let it go. And she knew now. Wherever the trail led, their fates were bound, not by accident, but by something far older, deeper and stronger than either of them could understand. The next morning dawned pale and cold. The mountains loomed closer now, their peaks veiled in mist. Between them and the travelers wound the white river, wide, fast, and silver beneath the rising sun. Its roar filled the air, wild and deep like the breath of the earth itself. Ta stood on the bank, her hair tangled by the wind, her hands trembling slightly on the reins of Chayton's horse. "It's beautiful," she whispered, awe softening her voice. Chayton nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the far bank. "And dangerous. The water's strong this time of year." She turned toward him. "Can we cross?" He studied the current, gauging its pull. "If we move with it, not against it." He glanced at her then, his gaze steady. "Hold tight when we go. Don't look back." Something in his tone, quiet but certain, made her heart race. This wasn't just a river. It was the line between everything they'd known and everything they might become. Chayton mounted first, wincing as his healing shoulder strained. He reached down a hand. "Come." Tia hesitated only a second before taking it. His grip was firm, grounding her. She climbed behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist as he urged Kiona forward into the shallows. The cold hit instantly, sharp, biting, alive. The horse snorted, muscles quivering as the current pressed hard against her legs. The water rose to their knees, then to Chayton's thighs. "Lean with her," he shouted over the roar. "Don't fight it." Ta did as he said, clutching him tighter as the river surged around them. The world became noise and motion. Churning foam, crashing water, the strain of muscle and will. Every second felt like a lifetime. Then the horse stumbled on a hidden rock. Taya gasped as she slipped sideways, her fingers tearing away from Chayton's belt. "Ta!" The current seized her instantly, dragging her downstream. She kicked, choked, fought to breathe. The icy water blurred her vision. And then a hand, strong, unyielding, Chayton's. He caught her wrist, his face twisted with effort. "Hold on." Their fingers slipped once, twice, and before she managed to lock her hand around his forearm. With a final heave, he pulled her back against the saddle, gasping, trembling, but alive. The horse surged forward with a desperate burst of strength, hooves striking against stone, and suddenly the ground leveled. The current eased. They had crossed. Tia clung to him, her chest heaving. The far bank was green, wild, untouched. Flowers grew along the edge of the forest, and mist hung low over the ground. It felt unreal, sacred. Chayton slid off the horse and turned to help her down. When her feet touched the earth, she nearly collapsed, and he caught her again, arms firm around her waist. "You said not to look back." She whispered breathlessly. "And I didn't," he smiled faintly. "Good, because everything behind us is gone." For a long moment, they just stood there. Two survivors, soaked and trembling, but free. The air on this side of the river felt different. Purer somehow. The wind carried the scent of pine and rain, and far above an eagle circled a lone shape against the brightening sky. Chayton looked up at it. My people say, when an eagle flies above you after a crossing, it means the spirits approve your path. Ta followed his gaze, eyes shining. Then maybe the spirits have finally stopped playing tricks on us. He chuckled softly, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. If they have, they left me one I don't want to give back. Her heart fluttered at his words. She stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. And what's that? He reached up, his fingers tracing the edge of her jaw. You. The wind stilled for that heartbeat, and time seemed to hold its breath. Tia's eyes filled, and she leaned into his touch. The river's roar softened behind them, replaced by the rustle of leaves, a sound that felt like peace. When their lips finally met, it wasn't the wild desperation of the past nights, but something slower, deeper, a promise, the kind that didn't need words. They broke apart only when the eagle's cry echoed again overhead. Tia smiled through her tears. Where do we go now? Chayton looked out across the open land beyond the forest where the hills rolled endlessly beneath the sky. We build, we plant, we live. She took his hand, their fingers intertwining easily now together always. And so they walked from the river's edge into the new land, the Apache warrior and the woman who had slipped into his bath and somehow into his heart. Behind them, the white river flowed on, wild and untamed, and carrying away every ghost, every chain, every shadow of what they had been. Ahead of them stretched a world untouched by fear, and for the first time, both of them truly belonged.